My name's Paul Morton. I'm the Northwest Technical Advisor for Germinal. I usually start my talks with saying my accent. I'm a New Zealander. If anyone's trying to work it out before I get going. So I have lived here for 20 odd years. So I am a local in the Northwest now. So this talk today is based on getting more for your budget for your sports pitch renovations, sort of amateur or semi-professional. Uh, Kind of in sustainability background as well, just to make sure you're doing the right things for future proofing your grounds. So just a bit of housekeeping to start with. Germinal Amenity, we're a sixth generation family owned company. We've got both amenity and agricultural divisions. Agricultural is much larger. We sell direct to you guys, the amenity customers. Our head office is based in Belfast, the admin side of things, and the company started there 201 years ago now. Our main depot was in Lincoln in England. Has a easier network for the motorways for deliveries, which we can do within 24 hours. So Germinal Amenity is active in Great Britain, Ireland, and New Zealand. We sell to another 27 countries as well. Plus, we have exclusive relationships with breeders in the US and Europe, plus New Zealand, which will provide us with the complete seed portfolio, which covers all the amenity sectors, golf, sports, etc. We added fertiliser a number of years ago to our range, a basic range, and more recently in the last decade or so, much more professional products, exclusive products, as the market is always changing and demand is always changing too. So it's getting more for your budget on natural sports, turf pitch maintenance. So really, what is a natural pitch? What do we call a natural pitch in our industry? So yeah, it consists of soil and turf. It sounds simple. Ideally, it's a sandy loam structure. Again, most of the amateur guys out there, semi-pro, will be working with clay, heavy loam, whatever you've got really, but ideally, if it's constructed on sandy loam. And again, drainage, whatever form of drainage you've got, is massively key, especially as we know right now at the moment. The grounds who have invested in drainage, to be fair, it's across the whole industry, golf and everything, other ones who are still open and doing well. And yeah, more importantly, it's organic grass, so not artificial pitches, etc. 3G, 4G, 5G, and so on. So I mean, there are obviously other types, and you see these on the tally more of the rugby stadiums, football stadiums, and these are moving on so rapidly it's almost hard to keep up with the terminology. So the two main types, I guess, of elite pitches now, you've got your hybrid carpet pitch, and that's pretty much what the name is. It is a carpet. It is rolled out on top of your normal construction of sandy loam, undersoil heating, etc. So that is basically a plastic fiber mesh with little plastic strands of grass sticking up. They're about 3 or 4 inches long, and they'll sit just under the height of the cut. Once that's laid down, you then just infill that with the root zone to the desired height, and then just look after that pitch as you would. It still makes up 95% natural grasses, so it's not really, those plastic fibers are just for structure. They're not going to replace any lost grass. So if the goalmouth, etc., is wearing out, then yeah, those plastic fibers won't give it the coverage. It's more to hold the soils together. So a stitch pitch is the same sort of technology, but this is done vertically by punching plastic fibers about a foot into the ground. Some of those are twisted in, and again, they stick up just below the mowing height. And again, you infill with root zone and treat it as you would any normal pitch. Um, Again, 95% coverage of natural grasses. So yeah, the grass types. This is where we come into it, what we want to be talking about today, really. So we talk about desirables and undesirables a lot in our industry. So the desirables we want in any pitch, predominantly perennial ryegrasses, and they have two types, diploid and tetraploid. I'll touch on these a little bit further because it's something that's obviously, again, come in very rapidly in the last few years. Parts of Europe and parts of America, where it's a lot colder, will use smooth stalk meadowgrass as well as either part of the mixture or the main variety. We've tried that in the UK, mainly in the 2000s, and it just doesn't establish quick enough amongst the ryegrass, or it just gets overdeveloped, over-enveloped by the ryegrass if they're sown together. And that's, again, the same with turf growers, etc. So we don't sell a lot of smooth stalk meadowgrass anymore. Tall fescue, again, is used in Europe, and especially in the really cold parts where they play like American football in the snow. They'll use that, and again, the varieties are slightly different in Europe, so it's not an option yet. And again, in the 90s, red fescue was used to bulk up the mixture, and basically that's kind of been what there's always been a sort of an underlying issue that ryegrass doesn't give you the body, the density, the holding the soil structures together. So again, there's always been trials or people having to go with something else, and it always tends to come back to nothing still beats perennial ryegrass. And at the moment, that extra option is the tetraploid, which people were putting in, and it is working in some situations. So again, undesirables, across the whole industry, it is mainly poa annua, as we all know. But again, there are many subspecies of this. The main ones, obviously, poa annua, but obviously the perennial poas, which is the species you're more likely to be starting to see about now out there. It's that first poa plant that will show its face when the temperature slowly starts rising. And yeah, it's that really luminous green, soft grass that, yeah, it does give you some recovery and some coverage this time of year. It is the weakest species. It'll be the first to go come summer, and whatever's hanging around in the back end will disappear as well. We kind of label all these as meadow grasses, but again, within that, you've got Yorkshire fogs, bent grasses, cocksfoot, all those other species that will blow in, and they're more likely to stick around a bit longer than your poas, but again, still cause issues that the perennial ryegrass won't. Disease, wear, lack of recovery, etc. So yeah, so what I said before, diploids and tetraploids, what is the main difference? So diploids are the varieties we predominantly use in ryegrass. So they have two sets of chromosomes without getting too scientific. While most living plants, most things are two chromosomes. And tetraploids will have four, which means it's a larger plant, have larger cells. In agriculture, tetraploids are mainly used for quicker establishment, larger leaf, but also they are less dense. So you can sow it into a meadow situation and still have clovers and herbs and so forth growing in and around that without being too dense. I think it's moved on more in amenity than this. We can't really call it an agricultural variety anymore. And to be fair, a lot of the elite stadiums are using it now. The only major concerns, really, if you look at this graph statistic here, this is from and the BSPB or the STRI sports list. Um, and yeah, it just shows diploids. These are the averages, the top 5 cultivars in each list. Diploids still outperform it a lot. The main benefits guys are seeing at tetraploids is just winter germination, winter establishment, but the plant is nowhere near as strong. So you're losing what you gain, in my opinion. But like I said, some of the elite stadiums and those guys do love it. Yeah. So why are the undesirables so bad? Like high impact sports, horse racing, rugby, etc. The surface can become dangerous. It you the soil is a lot more exposed. Those grasses just are the first to go. No matter how well we look after them, they just disappear. Um, Aesthetically, you know, they don't stripe up as well. They don't mow as well. They don't show the line marking off as well. The clumpier, furrier plants, they're not as great. A key one I kind of touched on before. They do give you a false sense of coverage as well. So at this time of year, you look out on your pitch and there's no grass there at all. It's hammered. But then you come to sort of May time when you're going knocking on the door of your treasurer and say, look, can we have X amount of money to overseed? And they look out the window and say, well, there's plenty of grass out there now. It's come back. Those are those species that, yeah, they'll always come back. They are perennials or whatnot. But again, that's false. They'll disappear again as soon as the summer ends. No matter how well we look after them, feed wise or anything, they just die off. That's what they do. So again, why is this unsustainable? It's the buzzword of the time. So yeah, you will have to fertilize them more, up to 2 or 3 times a year. There will be a higher reliant on pesticides. And I know a lot of the amateur levels, we're not using a lot of fungicides as such, but yeah, where there's bare soil, Mother Nature puts something into it, so you'll get weeds coming in. So yeah, your herbicide bill will always be higher. Um, yeah, you will have an increased renovation and maintenance. The exposed sand will start disappearing. It comes in on the player's boots. It blows away when it's dry. It gets washed away. There's nothing holding it there. Um, you'll have matches called off simply because of the surface not being suitable. And again, at what cost is this to your club? We had it in the Northwest last summer where we had the Women's Rugby World Cup, and some of the grounds I deal with or know apply to be host grounds, and they just didn't pass the assessment simply because they hadn't kept up with the maintenance that was required. So possibly something I should have mentioned right at the start, but most of the things we're talking about today are if your pitch is already at a decent level. So obviously there's no point doing these aesthetic upgrades if you have underlying issues, i.e. if your drainage is poor or you have no drainage, the soil's pitch isn't level, you don't have any sort of ongoing aeration or thatch removal program. But yeah, most people know this, and you're sort of always working to improve these. Irrigation is obviously quite a hot topic after the summer we had last year. I know it's not something most people will get installed. You can have it. I will touch on it a bit later when it comes to seeding, but yeah, it's not as imperative as it makes out. The seeds will sit dormant. They will come all right when the time comes. But yeah, if it's something we can have access to, then all the better. Yeah. So what should you do? The first point of call. I always start any assessment with a pH test, and my colleague Sandy will touch on that in his talk. Just it's basic soil science, working out where you need to start with nutrition and grass and whatnot. Without sounding big-headed here, always get a specialist seed uh, representative in. We do this 40, 50 hours a week. I've done it for 25 years. Assess that grass coverage. We can look at the grass. We can tell you what species that grass are. We'll know what's good, what's bad, and working from there. And then we'll always sort of set an overseeding program and a fertiliser program. And what we do at Germinal Amenity is we'll always work with your budget. There's no point us trying to push, excuse me, products that not so much unnecessary, but if you're an amateur rugby club, for example, you're not going to be spending 2 grand on a wetting agent program or biostimulants and all these kind of things. Well, while they're fantastic, and I'm not knocking these products, is you can get the basics done um, with simple NPK and simple overseeding. And again, it's will work with what needs to be done. For example, one year you might need a lot more seed. Um, Other years, if it's a very wet year, you might need to up your fertilizer. But again, we're working within your budget, and like I said, there's no point trying to get more money out of clubs who don't have it. Yeah, so your seed choice. What are we actually going to decide to use? So yeah, for me, it is pretty much perennial ryegrass across the board when it comes to renovations, new pitches, or anything. Quality or quantity, it's a phrase I don't really like, but yeah, sometimes you might need to use a lot more seed after this winter. I think, yeah, people will be going for quantity. When I say quality, at Germinal Amenity, all our seeds quality, we just sort of have different levels, i.e., an elite stadium mixture will cost us more to harvest, produce, etc. Um, and even the so-called cheaper mixture, again, it still is stringently tested through our laboratories at Lincoln, our field inspectors, everything. So yeah, I probably should have mentioned at the start at Germa, we control the seed production from the farmers right through to going in the bag, right across the board. So the three main mixtures we have is All Sport Renovator, which is the main one we sell to contractors, amateur rugby clubs, etc. Yeah, it's usually our most economic 3 varieties of perennial ryegrass. The A30 is what we sort of call training ground mixture, or it's sort of your first team pitch seed. And the way this industry is moving, how rapidly it's moving, some of these varieties were in the stadium mixtures only a couple of years ago, which leads us to the A20. So that's the elite stadium mix. So it's at the moment it's on places like it's in Leeds United and Chelsea, a number of high semi-professional clubs as well. So once you've made that seed choice, then you look at how we're going to apply it, and yeah, obviously getting a contractor in is an extra cost. They're not as expensive as you might think. The guys with the seeding machines can come and do a pitch in an hour, and there's plenty of local guys. There's a lot nearby. Yeah, but doing it yourself is not out of the question. Broadcast spreading, sand dressing, etc. Always enrolling it in, so forth. So yeah, just quickly on once you've done all those, a bit of, well, I guess I could say not myth busting, but just kind of things that I think you may need to relook at. So once your seeding's been done, I think it's always been sort of tradition to stay off it. You rope off your field, no one's allowed on it, not allowed to touch it. It's not always that important. For me, you get on there and you roll those seedlings back in. We see farmers do it for generations. All those stripes in the fields are pushing those seeds back down to protect them from any drought. Push those root crowns back down in. Again, fertilizer, people think it's making your grass grow too much. It's making it weak. It's it's you'll be mowing it too much. It's not the plant at that vulnerable stage needs the nutrients, and it's not just about forcing it to grow. As Sandy will talk about, it's the right levels of nitrogen, it's the right form of nitrogen, just to keep it healthy. And probably the biggest one that we're guilty of is just not mowing it. Let's leave it long. Let's let it recover. Let's keep the long leaf to hold the moisture. Yeah, it will do that, but also that makes the growth lanky. It makes it soft growth. It doesn't spread. It doesn't tiller. When we leave ryegrass, especially in the summer, it's going to produce seed. That's what it naturally wants to do. So if we're constantly sort of mowing that, so trimming it, the plant knows to adapt. Excuse me. It needs to start growing horizontally a bit more. So it will actually help it to mow it. Yeah, keeping it moist. Again, I touched on this earlier in regards to irrigation. Yeah, it is almost impossible if you don't have access to anything. But like I mentioned, last summer we had weeks without rain, and most guys that I dealt with who were seeding, it did end up coming through. The old adage that seed will just rot or go away. Excuse me. It doesn't. It will sit until it's good and ready, unless something detrimental has happened, i.e., it's been flooded or washed away or something. It will eventually end up coming through. So that's pretty much the end of my talk. I'm just going to see. I've got a couple of questions up here. I'll try and bring these up. Yeah. So first question is, where should we the minor clubs spend their money for the maximum impact? So I think you should always start with getting that grass seed coverage up. The number of amateur rugby clubs I deal with, it was something that was done sporadically, and as long as you're consistently doing it, I'm not talking about putting lots and lots and lots on each year. If you can just consistently put on a good amount of grass seed over time, and within 3 or 4 years, you really notice that it you don't have that same sort of attritional loss every year. I get feedback from some of my guys that they're not sweeping out the sand in the changing rooms as much. It's all staying on the pitch. There's less wear, which then turns to your fertiliser. And again, it's about being consistent. You don't want to do peaks and troughs. And yeah, if there was anything you could sacrifice, it would be, for example, like a spring fertiliser. If we're looking very hard at your budget. But yeah, so for me, it's the seed's got to stay consistent. Another question is, what do we do to stop the pigeons eating the grass seed? Yeah, that's always a major problem. Yeah, at the end of the day, that will happen. If you can get those seedlings buried, i.e. with a seeder or a top dressed over it, pigeons don't really forage as much. They'll be on there looking for worms and grubs and whatever else. It seems like they're eating what you seed, but realistically, they'll never eat as much as they can. We're talking thousands of seeds per gram, and a pigeon has a stomach the size of a marble. So that they will eat some, but not a lot. So that's the question. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing and I'll pass on to Sandy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Paul. My name's Sandy Pentecost. I'm the Community Technical Sales Rep for the Southeast of England. And today I'm just going to take a bit of time to talk to you about how to use fertilisers or get the best out of them, get the best out of your soils. So let's get underway. First of all, why use fertiliser? Well, the most important thing is that you see a nice football pitch there, could be subject to up to three games a week. Even more so probably with fixture congestion at the end of the season, especially after the 2 months we've just had, and a lot of games are off. So we need it for recovery. And that's the most important thing, really. As well as recovery, fertiliser is going to aid with root development and disease resistance. And we also need renovation to push it on and get fast growth. So really the main focus is, we need to work on some kind of rapid recovery. So let's have a look at the macronutrients. So if you think about a bag of fertilizer when you buy it, you'll have the three main numbers on it. And so let's just use an example. Say 1266, which everyone will be probably familiar with. It's just a basic homogeneous or blended product. And the 1266, so you'd have 12 nitrogen, 6 phosphorus, and 6 potassium. So the nitrogen promotes leaf and shoot growth, and the phosphorus is there for sort of new seedlings, root development. And the potassium, I always like to think of as a bit like the plant vitamin, really. It sort of enhances stress tolerance, kind of protects against disease. These are the most important things when you're fertilizing. I've highlighted those because they're the most important macronutrients. We do have other macronutrients such as calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. But the most important things are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So calcium is responsible for strengthening the cell walls. Magnesium is a central component of chlorophyll, and sulfur is important for protein synthesis. Sometimes if you have a low sulfur count, it can affect how nitrogen is taken up. So sulfur is always a good one to keep an eye on. So let's move on to micronutrients. Now, micronutrients, not as important. It's really important not to get fixated on micronutrients. Macronutrients are the most important. They're going to do the most work for you. I've highlighted iron there because this is the one most commonly found in fertilizers. And the reason it is because it gives us that nice green up cover. It strengthens the cell walls, comes in different forms, like chelated iron or iron sulfate, which it would be within a bag of fertilizer. That's the one that's probably most important out of any of these. And I'm going to talk about pH in a little while and about how these are most available. And we'll come on to a little bit more detail in that. So let's look at the types of fertilizer. So the first one, we think back to the 1266 I just mentioned. That would be basically a homogeneous compound or a blended fertilizer. If we look at this one here, it's more like a compound fertilizer. The compound fertilizer, basically each and every one of those granules in there will have 1266 analysis within it. That's what it will deliver. If you have a blended fertilizer, all the different granules basically total the sum of its parts to reach 1266. So it'll have different varying different amounts of nutrient within each granule. Now, what's not good about these products? It's good that they will give you a nice quick green up, but over long term, they're not very good at all. And if you can excuse my appalling drawing, what we'll do is if you apply a homogeneous or blended product, it just kind of goes straight up and straight back down. And you apply it again, straight up, straight back down. So it's peaks and troughs, really. There's no steady amount of nutrient being delivered at any time. It's all a bit boom and bust. So what you need to think of really is better, more sustained ways of feeding. And these will come through slow release or controlled release products, or even organic, which will release over a much longer period of time because it takes longer to break down. So slow release are usually a nitrogen inhibited product. They slow down the rate at which microbes can break it down. The controlled release product is polymer coated. So there's a plastic coating within that has nutrient that will respond to temperature and moisture. But the difference is, if we took our example here of the peaks and troughs, if you apply a controlled release product, it's just going to run like that. It's just going to feed what the grass needs. And it's nice and steady and even. And the misconception problem is with control release and slow release is people see the price of what they cost. and then they look at the cost of what a homogeneous or compound fertiliser looks like, and immediately reach for that one because it seems cheaper. But over the long term, that's just not the case, because you've got to apply the homogeneous or a compound or a blended one more often, and it's not really giving the plant a steady amount of nutrient. So really you need to focus on how you spend your money and not get fixated on the price, and start to think about more what it's doing for your plant over a longer extended period of time. The other one on there is a liquid fertiliser. So this is really to be delivered as a foliar feed. A certain percentage of it can be taken up by the stomata. I think it's around 13%. And then it's kind of straight into the soil surface. Usually liquid fertiliser is designed as a top-up and to partner something like a control release or a slow release product, or in place of, depending on your soil type. So soil type, let's move on to soil type. So we've got three types of soil there. Got sandy soil on the left, and then we've got a loamy soil, which is kind of a bit more of a traditional soil, in the centre, and then a clay soil, which is a heavy soil. Now, the difference between all of these, be quite obvious for anybody working with a sports pitch, is that they all drain differently. And for that reason, a freely draining soil would have a higher leach potential than a clay soil. And this is measured if you have a soil test done. It's something called CEC, which is a cation exchange capacity. And what that really is a measure of how well your soil can hold on to nutrients. So sand tends to be 1 to 5, usually a stadium environment. 5 to 15 is a loamy soil, which is like a kind of a standard soil. 15 is really the optimum point, as long as the pitch drains properly for CEC. And then we have clay, which can be anywhere between 15 and 40. So let's just talk about nitrification and at what point we're losing nutrient. So I'm just going to run through this on the right here. So if we apply ammonia into the soil, there's two sets of bacteria that break it down, and there's two processes within that. So the ammonia is broken down by the nitrous ammonas. Now, I spoke earlier about slow release products. And what happens is they'll have a compound mixed into them. There's dimethylpyrazole phosphate. There's DCD. I don't know how to pronounce that one, so I'm not even going to try. But these products slow down how quickly the nitrous ammonas can convert it. So the first step of the process is nitrous ammonas break it down into nitrite. At that stage, it's not plant available. And then the nitrobacter break it down into nitrate, which would get the point over here. Then it's plant available, it's more soluble, it can be taken up by the root hairs. This is the point at which it leaches though out of the soil. So if we think back to the soil types, it's all related. In a heavier soil, you might apply ammonium and you'll get a lot more volatilization, but you'll get the nutrients will last much longer. In a sandy soil, some of it will just get washed through before it even gets turned into nitrate through lack of organic matter or any humates to convert it, or exchange sites, what we call them, is positively charged exchange sites. So the problems with this is we all have a responsibility to the environment. Volatilization is obviously terrible for the atmosphere, or greenhouse gases, and then leaching is bad as well, because we can get runoff into water bodies, and this sets off a process which is called eutrophication. So if you get nutrients run off into water courses, what happens? You can get, say, if you had like a lake or something still water body, what can happen is you'll get a build up of nutrients in the water, and it'll form an algae across the surface. That then blocks light. All the light is blocked, and all the plants below the surface die. And that what happens then is a whole bunch of bacteria become active and start to decay the plants. that bacteria robs all the oxygen from the watercourse and it will kill aquatic life like fish. So that's why runoff into water bodies is really, really bad. And volatilization, we spoke about that. And low pH. Low pH is a problem because you'll get really poor nutrient conversion, and a lot of what I said, won't happen. The reason is because soil microbes can't live at low pH in acidic conditions. I'm just going to come on to a little info about that now. So I had a customer ask me what was going on in this picture. So if we look here, we can see these areas are quite poor. It had been fertilised, but nothing much is happening here. They're quite poor. But down these green lines, we can see a lot of nutrient conversion going on. Now the reason for this is, after soil testing, the pH here is 5.4, and the pH here is around about 7. Ideally, you want to be around 6.5 mark because that's a premium zone for ryegrass growth. But as we can see here, at 5.4, we look on the half chart here, your nitrogen conversion is increased dramatically. Whereas if we look at these lines here, we're up towards 7. It's up to as much as 35% more effective. So getting a soil test and finding out what your pH is and trying to push it into an optimal range will improve your efficiency and help you get much more return on your nutrient investment, basically. So you're probably wondering what exactly is going on in this picture. And it's quite simple, really. And you might experience this phenomenon yourself when you're out on sports pitches. But these lines here, what that is, this must have been the edge of a rugby pitch or a hockey pitch or something. And years of chalk line marking paint has been used, which is calcium carbonate. And there's just a huge deposit within there, which over time has just, stuck around. And what that means is that the pH has just been altered over a long period of time, probably years, because it's sticking around now. And I think we can see the touch lines there, and it's quite clear that there's no touch lines, but that's what's happened there. So just going back to talking about what I was talking about earlier about micronutrients, macronutrients, how they're most available, and pH plays an important role in that, because if you get your pH in a good strong range, somewhere around here, this is where everything is mostly available. Once you drift higher, you tend to, often most soil tests come back to me where manganese is just unavailable or very low. And then if you get lower, you get sulfur is probably less available. So really, if we're getting in this range straight down the center, this is our optimal range. You've got the best nutrient conversion, and also it's the best place to grow ryegrass. So this is what we're essentially aiming for, is to get down here to get the best out of our budgets when it comes to spending money on fertilizers. So for the best practice, the first thing you can do, we at Germinal can do this for you, is soil testing. You need to be able to build up a picture of what's going on below the ground, especially with your pH management. Because if you have got a low pH, like I mentioned, you're going to have to apply lime to get it into a good zone, and then you can increase your nutrient conversion efficiency. The other thing you need to consider is slower control release fertilizers. There's less need for labour. If you was in a sort of a sports club situation and you really want to maximise your budget, it's probably best to look at control release fertiliser. It's a kind of a one and done job, really. You can put that down the spring and that'll see you through most of the summer, and then maybe you'd want to think about doing one for the winter as well, dependent on budget. Another way you could look at it is liquid foliar feeds. This tends to be really angled towards people who have got equipment to do so. So it's really at areas that got larger resources that can afford tractor mounted sprayers. But you can combine this with slow and control release fertilizers. So basically, what you do is you base feed with control release fertilizer, then you can top up with liquid foliar feeds. I wouldn't use liquid foliar feeds um, just on their own if you're using a kind of a amateur sports club situation. It would just be far too expensive, far too labour intensive, and actually by the time you start using the machine all the time, it's not good for the environment. So last of all, water management. Just be mindful of how much water you're applying. If you have a means of moisture testing, that's great, but I understand, that's another resource conversation. But ideally, don't overwater, because overwatering in the wrong soil, it's not good, whether it's in a clay soil or a sand soil, really, because sand you're going to be washing it through, and then in clay you're gonna create waterlogging and issues. And the more air you trap in, the more air, the less air there is in the soil, the less opportunity there is for nutrient conversion. So what do we recommend? Well, we have some control release product. The good thing about this is you can apply it. It's a polymer coating. It'll bury itself into the surface of the soil, and it will respond to temperature. It's temperature regulated with moisture, and it will just release urea generally from the polymer coating as it swells open. And this avoids all those peaks and troughs that I spoke about. You'd associate with a homogeneous or a blended or a compound fertilizer. So there's reduced machine and labour use, which is good. And it's also good for the environment. And there's reduced leach and volatilisation potential, because remember what I said earlier, is they feed steadily over a longer period of time. And we have another slow release fertilizer. This one's an organo-mineral fertilizer. So this one's actually better for the environment because it has no plastic in it. And it will last 3 to 4 months. The other good thing about it, because it's got some organic in it, it'll have some humates, which will feed your microbes and help your soil biology. And it's a steady feed that's going to last up for 3 to 4 months. And once again, reduced leach and volatilisation potential. So that brings me to a close. And thank you for listening. You can reach out to me for any questions you have here, but I noticed that some questions were popping up at the bottom. What signs show if you have over-fertilized? Well, generally, you can get the turf will look weak, and what happens is when you over-fertilize, the plant becomes very soft, and what we actually call that, we term it as soft growth. And what that does, it makes the cell walls very thin, and they become susceptible to disease. So, I mean, the easiest way to back off that is just plan your fertilizer, schedule it in a way that you're not going to over fertilize. So fertilize to a point that once you get an idea of how your CEC and soil is working, that you can time the drop off from one and then time it so that when you're applying the next one, it's just going to slowly kick in. So they're overlapping properly. Chances are, if you've over fertilized, that's not happening. You're fertilizing too often. There's one for you there, Paul. We can only afford to overseed once a year.
Yeah, so overseeding times and rates. So yeah, ideally, you look at the renovation time, which we all do, sort of the springtime. But for me, it's whatever you can afford. If it's 30 bags of grass seed a year, maybe split that up, the 20 in the spring and 10 in the back end. It's all about that per annum spend. You're probably going to get better results splitting it rather than doing it all at once. But yeah, I understand, especially if you're getting a contractor in with a machine, then definitely that sort of May to June time is when you're going to get your maximum recovery. Next one for you, Sandy.
So what method do you recommend for applying fertilizer? Use a fertilizer spreader. You can get smaller ones now, which are which are perfectly acceptable, but just be mindful of uh, you know checking what the spreading rates are. If you have the information to go with that, generally I'll have a booklet and some idea of how to calibrate the machine and calibrate it properly. Calibrate it properly. And what I also recommend is marking out your width of spreading. Some people do it. They'll do a turn and then they'll do 4 paces and then come back. But it's always a good idea to mark out maybe with some canes where you've been. And the best time to do it really is first thing in the morning in the dew, because then you can see where your wheel marks have been, and then you can apply some good accuracy. But outside of that, yeah, tractor mounted, we'll get a contractor to apply it. Obviously, I know there's a cost incurred with that. But always use a good quality machine to ensure some level of accuracy. With the winter, this cold, wet, saturated ground, would you recommend fertilising at this time? And if so, what would you recommend, liquid or granular? I wouldn't recommend fertilising. The reason being is because, as I mentioned before, there's not any air in the soil, so the microbes won't be able to convert it. And also, if it's cold and wet, microbes are not active. They're not going to be active at lower temperatures. You need the microbes to be able to convert it to nitrate to make it plant available. So at this time of year and in heavy wet conditions, I really wouldn't recommend fertilizing. You just got to kind of wait it out. There are products you could use if the pitch was able to get a sprayer across it. You could use some like potassium nitrate, calcium nitrate products, which would be obviously they're nitrate, so they don't need conversion. They can be taken up by the plants. But in a sort of local sports situation, that's probably not possible. So if sand doesn't hold nutrients, why do Premiership clubs use it as their root zone? For drainage, pure and simple, really. They need playability. They need quick infiltration rates, and that's the reason they use sand. And they have to apply a lot of nutrient, and that's just really part and parcel of having a 90% sand root zone. You just face the fact that you've got to feed it a lot. They can add products into it to help overcome that. If you was, say, in a liquid program in a stadium, you'd be adding humics. And what they do is they help it within the in the surface to be converted into plant availability. They'll probably use products like potassium humate or granular humics when they're renovation, zeolites. Anything with zeolites are basically, it just has a nutrient holding capacity. So anything they can do to increase their nutrient holding capacity. But in the sand root zone, yeah, they're generally there because they're tied into the drainage and they want quick playability. And it's fascinating to see nowadays, even after all the weather we've had off, that some of the pitches have struggled a bit. But there's not no games, not any games being called off in the Premier League for waterlogging. So that brings us to the end of the questions.
Appreciate everyone giving up your time, and like I said, if there's any more questions you've got, certainly get in touch with one of us. There's 5 or 6 of us around the country now, so yeah, we're always available. So thank you very much.